So, as you all know, what's been going on in East Palestine, Ohio, since the derailment from Norfolk Southern has really ravaged that town, both economically, ecologically, and just on a personal level for so many people out there. And one of the groups that I've been speaking with is United for East Palestine. They are a group that is trying to make it so that they can get testing done, actual third party independent testing done, just to show that they need help in that town. And there's so much that's going on right now. So I would like to introduce my guest that we have here today. We have Zhuja coming in, as well as Alex from United for East Palestine. Both of you, Zhuja and Alex, how are you doing today?
Okay, how are you?
Doing well.
Here we go.
That's good.
Hey, what's up, guys?
I think Zhuja, I think you froze up just for a second, but good to see you. I think you're back. Okay. So one of the things that a lot of people may not be aware of is what is United for East Palestine. Alex, maybe you can expound on this a little bit. And what is your primary goal you're trying to do in East Palestine?
So, United for East Palestine started as a Facebook group created by Giannis and Emily Misakia, who live within the impacted zone, not in East Palestine. Jenna lives 12 miles from the derailment site. Emily, I think 9. And I got hooked up with them because I am subscribed to the Railroad Workers United email list, so I get their newsletters. So I found out about this pretty much as soon as it happened, and I reached out just thinking maybe I could help with putting together some kind of infrastructure for getting people out and resources in terms of mutual aid. And from there, we became a team. We hooked up with people like Professor Welton from Purdue and his team, Purdue University, Dr. Kalam and her team, University of California, San Diego, River Valley Organizing, and Amanda, who runs that. And we have just been trying to, our goal organizationally is to identify and utilize the potential resources that exist outside of the community and help them in coming and bring them to bear to actually aid the community impacted by the train derailment and the subsequent chemical plume created by Norfolk Southern burning everything.
Mm-hmm. And Zhuja, technically you were a resident of East Palestine. And what happened on that day of the derailment and subsequent explosion? What was your experience?
Well, I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but it was pretty surreal. It was terrifying. We actually had very little information at first when it was happening, and that was a pretty nerve-wracking time because we had about, I think, 79 different fire departments and emergency vehicles and all this and that coming throughout our town of 4,700 people for like hours, and we didn't even know it was like chemicals or on the train burning or that it was even a train derailment for a while. Yeah, it was really confusing and scary, and then they blew it up and it expanded really quickly, and that was really scary because we had evacuated the night of it because we got so sick and the fumes came into our home, and we evacuated about 20 miles away. But the day they did the uncontrolled burn, it just spread like a sandstorm of black death, like dark, and it was I'll never forget it. It almost felt like, I don't want to compare it to anything, but it was a very memorable, horrific time in my life, seeing that cloud expand so fast. And they said, within the mile, it was imminent death, according to our governor. And then to see it expand 20 miles away, and you're like, wait a minute, like, it's just crazy.
Let me ask you this. Have you experienced any different types of symptoms as the resulting plume of smoke that has engulfed the area where you were living?
Yeah, so my house, I just tried to go back to it about 2 days ago. It smells overwhelmingly like ozone and diesel fumes. It makes me very sick within, like, honestly, like 10 seconds. It's upsetting. A lot of the symptoms match CDC for these chemicals when they're burned, and then when they react with air or water or what have you, it just, makes it compiles it. And I have a genetic disorder that makes me sensitive to these things anyway. So it feels it. I had a panic attack, so many times trying to go back into my house just because I couldn't wrap my head around it. And I had the team that Norfolk hired to test our air. They came in with EPA and everybody, and they said, no, your air is fine. And I'm crying because it smells so overwhelming, and they're claiming they don't smell anything at all. So that's unnerving to think that they would lie to you or just deny it when you can, very, very much smell it and feel it, and your instincts telling you to run and nobody's believing you. It's like the ultimate gaslight.
Yeah, I mean that's got to be very disheartening and heartbreaking, to hear, like the things you smell and the things you see aren't the things that they say is true, and you and many other people smell and see the exact same thing, and they're telling you with your eyes that they don't believe what your eyes see.
Right,
It's
right. And then we've talked to experts that said, genetics plays a huge role in the reactions to
hmm
these things. I mean, it's a lot of the symptoms are allergic reactions, and they mess with your central nervous system. And
hmm
just like how some people had COVID, some people barely were affected, other ones were hospitalized. Some people can smell labels and stink, but other people can't. Well, same thing. So just because some people are fine doesn't mean everyone else is fine, and that our feelings aren't valid, and our symptoms aren't real, because that's crazy to me. And they made this sham of a clinic that they didn't even test. They didn't even do vitals at first, and then they said, if you had any symptoms, go there, and it was a joke. And they told us to go to a real doctor. Well, now they're making it a permanent clinic, which is interesting to me because they were telling us at the same time our symptoms are unrelated, all the while matching CDC symptoms for chemical exposure. It doesn't add up.
Yeah, and one of the things that I brought up when Alex was on my channel, and one of the things I brought up, and maybe some people can look into this, but a few years ago there was an environmental accident that happened in Libby, Montana, and it gave the president emergency powers, to give everyone in the area Medicare. This is actually in Section 1881A of the Social Security Act, and he was actually able to do that. There were many groups who are actually trying to do that nationwide due to the pandemic, but of course they weren't listening to any of us. But at least if that could be passed for East Palestine as well as the subsequent surrounding areas, especially in Western Pennsylvania, then that could be done. But you guys haven't had any type of positive response from the local and state government, have you?
Well,
No.
the government's entire goal in all of this has been to gaslight and obfuscate and tell people that everything is fine. So the biggest hurdle to get any of these mechanisms going is for the government to actually admit there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I was told by DeWine's office that the reason why they can't declare an emergency is because FEMA says that there's no structural damage, which I beg to differ because there's residue all over my house. And the EPA is currently using visual residue inspections to determine the background levels for dioxins in the dirt. So, I mean, is there residue or there's not? And I mean, clearly my porch has a white residue all over it. My house still stinks. So I would consider that structural damage, property damage, and I would consider all my things contaminated at that point.
well, I mean, if all the animals in the surrounding area are dying around you, then that is also a means to say something's not right, right? Like,
Yeah, I
I
had
mean,
Ohio ODNR tell me, and one of the toxicologists with the federal EPA, they both tried to say that fish are coming back to Sulphur Run, which runs right. It's a creek that runs right behind my house. It's one of the most contaminated creeks in the area. Everything's still completely dead, and they're telling us that fish are coming back. And I said, no, they're not. Nothing's coming back.
Lying.
Wow.
Lying. What is Norfolk saying? What is their latest line, or what's happening with them, their reaction and their response?
Norfolk Southern has
Alan
been
Shaw
pretty
said he's gonna.
consistent. What were you saying?
We can start with you, Alex, and then
I was just going to say that Norfolk Southern they've been pretty consistent with their messaging. Their messaging has been platitudes, very passive statements. Their whole goal in all of this has just been making sure to protect their public relations while protecting their financial incentive to do as little as possible to deny all culpability. Which is why they don't. Every time Norfolk Southern CEO has gone on, whether it's testifying to the Senate or on CNN or whatever, the one the line is always, "We're going to make it right. We're committed. We're gonna be there in the long haul." What he's not going to say is, "This is our fault. People have been poisoned. This is dangerous. People have been harmed." Nothing that actually takes any accountability for the reality of and damage and potential serious harm that has been done to other human beings, because that would make them legally liable and culpable for their actions. Also, not going to make any concrete statements of saying we are going to pay for people's houses, or we are going to pay to have people evacuated, or we have set up a fund that anybody can use in order to have free medical. They're not going to make any concrete statements because their incentive is to avoid that. And of course, the incentive of the broader sort of corporate media is to aid them in doing that, since their effective function is just to work as a PR firm for the government and corporations in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So and I think Souza, go ahead, JB. You were going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I think she accidentally dropped out. But one of the things I also want to bring up is that you guys put out a press release, and this press release recently, it says Common Sense Summit, Saturday, April 15th at 5 p.m. Eastern, says 1,000 train derailments take place in the United States per year. Toxic chemicals are spilling into the water, soil, and land at a rate that is truly absurd. There has been zero effective discussion or strategy to address these catastrophes. The EPA now runs cover for industrial polluters, the exact opposite function it was originally created for. It continues, the U.S. government is no longer protecting the basic necessities of life. United for East Palestine and River Valley Organizing invites you to an online summit for all individuals and groups interested in advancing the common interests of clean air, clean water, clean soil. So, and he gives the email down here at alex@united4.org to RSVP. So you're going to be having basically, an online summit.
Yeah, well, the ambition behind that is we're fighting this. The community in and around East Palestine is fighting this fight for survival, to get people evacuated, to get the government to admit there's a problem in the first place, to hold Norfolk Southern accountable. The issue is, this is a battle that is attempting to is struggling against the mechanisms of a much larger infrastructural and systemic rot that is controlling the collective destiny of our society, which is filling all of our water, all of our air, and all of our soil with these toxic chemicals, some of which last literally billions of years. And it's the operational the standard operational procedure in all of this is to sweep everything under the rug, and to tell everyone nothing to see here, everything's fine, and move on. The amount of toxic waste that is now inside the rivers flowing in and around the East Palestine area, the amount of toxic soot that is covering people's homes, none of that is particularly unusual. The only thing that is unusual enough about this event that anybody cared enough for it to get national news coverage was that they set it on fire and created this very large and dramatic explosion that was all over social media. And because social media people kept sharing it, the corporate news organizations came in. The corporate media organizations came in. I want to call them news. I don't think that's a fair assessment. But the corporate media came in and a week of saying this is the big story, and then a week later they're all gone, as we all knew that what they were going to do. And so the point behind this summit is to try and get as many organizations, as many people with any sort of standing, either in whatever community, education, or media, or what have you, everybody of all stripes, regardless of what ism or political ideology or economic philosophy you personally subscribe to. None of that matters. There are three basic agreements that need to be made in order to come together, which is clean air, clean water, and clean soil being non-negotiable. That those three things being non-negotiable necessities for functional society. And if we can agree upon those three things, then we can work together to do what is objectively necessary, just from a purely engineering perspective, to allow us to have those three basic things. Which is, so this summit is on the 15th, is hopefully a way for us to get as good of a showing as we can of different organizations, different people, anybody with any sort of reach or platform or whatever, to come in and say that, yeah, okay, we're going to stand together. We're making these three agreements, and we're going to come up with a plan for how to move forward. Because what we found is that in East Palestine, we're fighting this fight. But the community of East Palestine is fighting this fight, but this fight is so much bigger, and the only way to win East Palestine is to see the larger fight, to grow this into something that we can use East Palestine as a focal point for how we need to handle this. These people need to be evacuated. The government needs to admit that it is wrong. We need people to know about just how toxic this area is, just how many chemicals have been released, what the government is doing to obfuscate. The government is intentionally working to keep people in this area by avoiding admitting that anything is wrong. All of that is a focal point of a microcosm of a much larger issue that impacts all of us. And the point behind the summit is for us all to come together, regardless of whatever political, ideological affiliation, around those three basic tenets of life.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to add anything to that, Jusha?
Alex, you summed that up pretty damn well. But yeah, I really feel like those things are necessary for our human race to survive. Like as a species, like, I mean, some of these chemicals that came from this burning of these chemicals from the train derailment can affect my son's ability to have children. And it's Agent Orange they found, which people in the Vietnam War know how bad it is, and it can be generational. So I really feel like these things are necessary to address, especially with places like the Shell cracker plant, which is only about 30 miles away over in Monaca, Pennsylvania. They've dumped over, I don't even know how many hundreds of VOCs into the air legally, and it's malfunctioning and continuing to dump more of it all over the people in Beaver County and surrounding areas. You can see it from miles away. But yeah, it needs to be stopped on a bigger scale than just East Palestine, for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest problems is that they aren't admitting that it's a problem, and if they don't admit that it's a problem, they won't do anything about it, and that's from what I'm seeing. This is one of the reasons why, and I'm gonna share this with the audience as well. You guys are actually raising money to get scientists, independent third-party scientists out here to prove that there's actually this is an ecological disaster in your area, so that they can actually get funding for this. It says chemicals from East Palestine might impact everyone in North America. This means many of you who are watching this right now will be affected. It says Norfolk Southern has made this area unsuitable for human life and animal life for that matter too. It says the EPA has been running cover for them by telling people it's safe. It's hard to get support for evacuation when all the official sources say everything is fine. And one of the things I just wanted to add to that as well is because, and like, you were saying, Alex, is that, you have the corporate media outlets. These corporate media outlets also get their funding from the same companies like Norfolk Southern, like CSX, like Union Pacific. So if they're getting their funding also from them, then they're not going to talk about these things at length that they're supposed to. Thankfully, for independent media, we have been able to get the sound out, and many people from independent media have had you guys on. But this is really what needs to happen from the viewers. You guys need to share, not just on RBN, but not just on my channel, but other people. I know Heartlands Media has had you guys on. I know that Sabby has had you guys on. So if you guys can share this so that people can keep their sense of outrage and to move things along for the people of East Palestine, because these are just working people, just like you or I. And so I think that's the point that needs to be brought home. And so, as from what I can see here, you guys have raised a little over $3,600 so far out of your goal of $100,000. It looks like it's a lofty goal, but it's a goal that can be achieved nonetheless. So if you guys would like to, I'm going to put the link inside the chat as well, so that you guys can contribute as well, so that they can get independent third-party testing, so that they can prove to them beyond a reasonable doubt that this needs to be fixed in this area, because you guys really are just like been through the ringer, especially by Norfolk Southern.
I appreciate that. I just want to add, I wouldn't call it a lofty goal. It is a necessary goal. At $100,000, just to put this into perspective, some of these tests, just a single sample, testing a single sample, cost multiple thousands of dollars for just one sample, a single test. The area of land that is potentially impacted by this stretches all the way up to Ontario, Canada, through upstate or northern parts of New York, Kentucky. The amount of sampling that would need to be done, or that needs to be done, if we are to have any sort of realistic idea of how many people and how far these chemicals plume spread, and what concentrations of chemicals people were exposed to, there needs to be a vast amount of data gathering that has to be done. And in a short amount of time, most of the snow is already melted. Once all the snow melts and all the rain goes into the soil, it's going to be much, much more difficult to prove there's any connection to what symptoms you might start having, heaven forbid, in 5, 7, 9 years, if there's an uptick in autoimmune disorders because people have been exposed to these toxic chemicals. If we haven't done the work now to prove there is a direct to prove that these toxic chemicals we're here to prove a direct connection, it's going to be much more difficult to help those people in the way that they need, and for those people to be able to actually mitigate the problems. And like I said, this is there is more than it's getting chemical testing from samples all across the entire Northeast. We're working with Dr. Galam, who is a very respected medical researcher, to get blood tests, blood work, full spectrum of every single chemical that could possibly have been exposed to, because vinyl chloride was in the car. There were chemicals that were already there. But when you set all of this stuff on fire, it creates new chemicals, such as acrylates. And we don't even know what all chemicals were in the plume, because some of them might have gone farther away than others because of the way different chemicals have different weights and distributions, etc. And we don't have the answers to any of this. There are so many questions to answer that the government is doing the opposite, is doing everything they can to prevent us from finding those answers. And the only way for us to find those answers is to get them ourselves, which is the point behind the Independent Science Fund.
Yeah. And one of the questions I wanted for Juja, you mentioned that you have a son, correct? One of the things that I wanted to ask is how, and this is really just to bring all this down to earth for everyone. How has this been an interruption in your life regarding your son, also going to school, as well as you and your neighbors going to work? How has this been affected to you? But how has this affected you?
Yeah, it's been majorly disruptive. We've been living in a hotel for 2 months, but we've bounced around to a couple hotels because you can only stay for so long, and they say they run out of rooms. A lot of people that are trying to stay out of town right now are in the same situation. My son's doing virtual school, which has been awful because the school's doing the best they can, but they had to throw together last minute plans to set this up, and my son does a lot better in person, and he doesn't really understand why the schools are open right now, and I don't to send him with many kids very sick. So he is kind of probably a little confused about why some people say it's okay and other people say it's not. And that's very confusing for a child. He's 9 years old, and it's very traumatic for us to living in a hotel because our house could kill us. Like he got really sick the night of it, so that's terrifying. I was around his age during 9/11, and that didn't directly impact me, but I saw how, big it was, and like just to have your, home ripped away from you in any kind of natural disaster is traumatic, and he's struggling with it. And I was out of work already because I had a broken leg actually, and then this all happened, and I, can't figure out where to live and how to homeschool my son because there's no teacher doing it. Like I literally have to become a teacher too. And that's really frustrating. So there's just no structure to our life right now, no normalcy. We don't know what's going to come next. We don't know how long they're going to be doing construction with the tracks, and it's not safe to be there either way. But there's no goal for anybody involved with like state or federal. Nobody's helping us. Nobody's telling us what's going to happen next, what our opportunities going to be. Like we're just left to fend for ourselves, and it's just been really, really hard on everybody involved, and especially the kids. I mean, it's bad enough they had to deal with COVID when everything shut down, but now, round two, it's awful.
Yeah, and so you said the schools are still open.
Unfortunately, yeah, and I have a major issue with that. Multiple reasons. Firstly, I don't think anybody should be in town whatsoever, especially if they're still doing testing. I mean, if you don't know, say you don't know. Don't say, yeah, sure, it's safe. Come bring back with your newborn babies. It's fine. Ignore the nosebleeds. Yeah, so the school also doesn't have proper filtration system. I mean, they just got donation from some company in Zelienople. It wasn't any state agency or anything like that. It wasn't Norfolk. And then they had some company come in and clean it, but there's still like a lot of, I've seen pictures go around from the school's vent system, and it's questionable. And my son has asthma and allergies. Like, I don't know how the schools are still okay with operating, but they're just going by the guidelines of the EPA and the health departments, which are all saying, it's all gone, it's all fine, everything's great. Ignore your sicknesses. It's wild.
Wow. And of course, if you're getting a hotel, that means if they're not giving any assistance, they're not giving you any assistance to pay for the hotel and living accommodations, are they?
They are, but so Alan Shaw likes to paint the image that he's doing everything he can and he's going to make it right. Well, when you go to the assistance center, it's not always the same story for everybody. We're getting told completely different things, even in the same day. It's all case-to-case basis, but they're nitpicking for some people, and then other people they're just giving them whatever. There's no clear indication who's going to get what when. And people have walked out in tears. It's not reassuring. They're not really helping people in the way that we need to be helped. They're not,
Wow.
They're telling me to go file a lawsuit to be able to replace the stuff in my house, and that I shouldn't feel like I shouldn't have to do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
So let's take this opportunity to point out, as a network, and I'm not speaking for our two guests, This is the reason why. This is an illustration of why supporting the red or blue team doesn't work, because both of those parties are backing the corporation in this example here. They're backing the corporation. That's why nothing's getting done. Prove to me that you're dying is basically what they're saying. Prove to us before we will give you a nickel. So, and both parties serve this. So I just want to point that out. This is the reason why RBN says supporting the duopoly. We are a post-duopoly movement because these parties are not doing anything for us. And we love what you're doing. You're starting this fundraiser saying nobody's going to do this shit, so it's time for us to do this. So solidarity to your organization and the movement you got going. JB, go ahead, JB.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't want to. I know you guys have to, but if I could just really quickly. First of all, thank you for that. So the fundraiser is important. We're trying to raise funds, but right now, what we're really trying to do is get as much energy and excitement for people to come to this summit as possible, because that from when we have if we can create a coalition of common sense just around 3 very basic principles: clean air, clean water, and clean soil. That's it. These are 3 just very pure and simple common sense notions that I don't think anybody who with any sort of good faith can dispute or will dispute. We all want clean air, clean water, and clean soil. We all require that. And if we can just come together around just those 3 basic necessities and figure out how we can work together as a coalition towards this basic, just most common sense necessities, that's the idea behind this summit. So please, if you know anybody, if you are interested in coming, tell everyone, send emails, send whatever. We're trying to get every single organization. We're trying to get anybody with any sort of platform to come to this summit so that we can work together, so we can build a larger movement to actually address the systemic issues. East Palestine is everywhere. Anywhere with a train running through it, I guarantee you there's been a train derailment near your town within the last few years. And I guarantee you, if you have had if you've had a few train derailments within the last few years near your town, some of them contain toxic chemicals that went into your soil, water, and air. And I also guarantee you that it got swept under the rug. There might have been a local news coverage, and after that, no one found out about it again. There was a chocolate factory that blew up in Pittsburgh, I think it was in Pittsburgh, like 2 weeks ago, and no one even knew about it. Just like exploded, like straight up blew up, killed almost 11 people. No one knows about that. That should be gigantic news. A week ago in Ohio, again, a boat capsized, spilling hundreds of thousands of gallons of methanol into the river. These things are not rare events. They are happening every single day. Their entire business model is that you do not know about it. All of these things are poisoning our water, are poisoning our air, and are poisoning the soil we use to grow food from, and they want to keep everything as hushed as possible. The only way we fight back against that is by all coming together, making sure that when these events happen, people know about them and that there is pressure to do something about them, and that we can form common sense, just engineering level, working with whether it's labor organizations like Railroad Workers United, who have very clear and concise platform for how to fix our rail systems, or any other aspect of our infrastructure where we can see absolutely no question that there are toxic chemicals that are being introduced into our soil and water, and how we actually address that. So please come to the Common Sense Coalition Summit on the 15th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email Alex at united.org or hit us up on Twitter, etc., etc. We can create, we can bring people together to address the issue in East Palestine, get the government to admit there's a problem, get people evacuated, and furthermore, do what we need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and really that it stops happening.
So thank you so very much for that. So any final words from Juja that you wanted to say as well?
I once again, Alex nails it right on the head. Yeah, really just want to make sure people can get out who want out, and then figure out the testing, and then be able to prevent it from ever happening anywhere else. And I mean, there's so many global people who are working in other countries, journalists and news anchors, I guess, or whatever you have. They're concerned about it too, because we breathe the same air. You know, these things travel. I've had people reach out to me from Canada and China, and a lot of places. So this is absolutely global issue. And if we want to continue anything as a human species, then we need to act now. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, so I just want to thank you both for coming on. Very powerful words from you, Alex. Thank you so very much. It's good to see you again, and so nice to meet you, Juja. And as well as they can follow you on Twitter, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
United for EP.
Hmm. And also, just to let everybody know, it's Alex at united4.org if you guys would like to. I already put it inside the chat, but if anybody is listening, you go to alex at united4.org so you guys can submit an RSVP so that you guys can attend the summit as well.